Please, we'll make sure that the committee is in order.
He knows that this nation used depleted uranium and white phosphorus in Iraq. Where is the moral high ground?
Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by answering a fundamental question that I get asked a lot as we discuss this very important issue, and that is, why do we even care about what's happening in Syria? And I want to make very clear my belief, that I think reflects the belief of most of the members of this committee, and that is that what happens in Syria is a vital national interest to the United States and to our national security for reasons that have already been outlined. The Syrian relationship with Iran is very significant. It's a key part of their ambitions to be the regional power, the dominant regional power. In fact, the Iranians love to brag that Syria gives them a border with Israel. Number two, Assad is an anti-American supporter of terrorism. He's a supporter of Hamas. He's a supporter of Hezbollah. And by the way, he's a supporter of al-Qaeda in Iraq, the same al-Qaeda in Iraq that's responsible for the death and maiming of countless brave young men and women who served our country in uniform. It's also of interest to us because of the instability that this is creating in Syria, instability that's allowing portions of Syria to quickly become kind of what Afghanistan was before 9/11, the premier operational space for global jihadists from abroad to come train and fight and plan attacks in the future. And now, added to that, is this chemical attack, which undermines the post-World War II world order, which basically said that these things are unacceptable. And allies that look at the United States and our capabilities of living up to our security promises is all at risk now as a result of all of this. But this is why Syria and what's happening in Syria matters to our national interest, why it's so clearly tied to a critical national security interest of the United States. By the way, most of, not all of this was true 2 years ago, when I joined other voices on this committee and in the Senate and beyond that advocated that at that time, when Assad was on the ropes, the United States should engage in trying to identify moderate elements and equip them so that they became the predominant rebel force in Syria and not others. But that didn't happen. Instead, the choice was made to lead from behind. The choice was made to watch as this thing unfolded. Others advocated that we should just mind our own business. And what we're seeing here now is proof and an example that when America ignores these problems don't ignore us. That we can ignore them, but eventually they grow and they come to visit us at our doorstep. And now we're faced with what we have. In fact, Secretary Kerry, a moment ago, you said that one of the calculations that Assad used in deciding to use chemical weapons was that the U.S. wouldn't do anything about it. Now, I understand perhaps why he made that calculation, because, yes, this was a horrible incident where 1,000 people died, but before this incident, 100,000 people had died, including snipers that were used to pick off civilians, including women that were raped as part of they would go into these villages and carry this out, and nothing happened. So, of course, he reached that calculation. So this is a reminder of what happens when we ignore the world, when we look inward sometimes and we ignore these problems. They only get worse and more difficult to solve. And that's the mess that we have here right now. We are left with options, all of which are less than ideal. And I want to walk through the three that have been presented to us by different voices, and then ask specifically about the one the President is considering. The first option is to decide to help Syrians remove Assad and replace a more and more moderate government. I think that's the ideal outcome, but it has its own complications. Today, the rebel forces on the ground are not just the moderate rebels. There are non-moderate rebels. There are jihadists that now control major portions of the country, and in other parts of the country are intermingled with these rebel forces, creating a real prospect that after the fall of Assad, a new civil war could be triggered, one that could involve sectarian violence, massacres of minorities, etc. This comes with its own set of complications. The other, which some voices have advocated, is doing nothing. But that would guarantee the following outcome: an emboldened Assad, an emboldened Iran, increased instability in the country because portions of that country will still be ungoverned, and it'll also send a message to the world that there is no red line that they should fear crossing. So Iran will move forward toward nuclear weapons. North Korea can act crazier if that's even possible. Our allies in South Korea and Japan may start to doubt their security arrangements with us. Israel may decide it needs to strike Iran unilaterally. Iran will move towards the bomb, which, by the way, won't just be an Iranian bomb. It'll be a Turkish bomb as well, an Saudi bomb, and maybe even an Egyptian bomb one day. The third is the action the President is asking us to consider, what he termed, not me, what he called a shot across the bow, a military strike of limited duration and scope that has three goals, as I understand it, that have been outlined here today. Goal number one is to hold Assad accountable. Goal number two is to deter this behavior in the future. And goal number three is to degrade Assad's capacity to carry out these attacks in the future. This is the President wants us to authorize a limited strike that would accomplish these three things. The questions that I have quite frankly, I'm a bit skeptical that the act that what the president is asking for will provide the support needed to achieve these objectives, and that these objectives are even realistic at this point. So here's my first question. I think I'll ask this of General Dempsey. The calculation that Assad has made is that the reason why he's using these chemical weapons is because he's afraid that if he doesn't, he could lose this war, be overthrown and killed. That's the calculation that he's made. That's why you use these chemical weapons. He wants to beat the rebels. So my question is this: can we structure an attack that tips that calculation, where he'll basically decide that he would rather risk being overrun by rebels than risking a limited attack from the U.S. if he uses these chemical weapons? He has to decide, I'll use chemical weapons and take on a limited U.S. attack in the future, or I'll risk being overrun by the rebels. How are we going to unbalance that and lead him to calculate that he's better off risking losing to the rebels?
Well, Senator, I think maybe even more insidious than that. He's reached the point where he now thinks of chemical weapons as just another weapon in his arsenal, and that's the part that makes this so very dangerous. And I think that as I've provided advice on what targets may be appropriate, I certainly want to degrade his capabilities coming out of this. I want to come out of it stronger than we go into it.
Leads me to my second question. How confident are you, and how confident can you express to this committee you are, that we can, in fact, put in place a military plan that's limited in scope and duration that can effectively degrade Assad's capability to carry out future chemical attacks?
I'm confident in the capabilities we can bring to bear to deter and degrade, and it won't surprise you to know that we will have not only an initial target set, but subsequent target sets should they become necessary.
And this question is probably of Secretary Kerry, and I think this was asked earlier, but I think it's important to elaborate on it. One of the concerns that I have, and I've heard others express, is that Assad could take 3, 5, 6 days of strikes, maybe longer, maybe shorter, and emerge from that saying, I have faced down the United States, and I have held on to power and survived, and at that point be further emboldened both domestically and perhaps even abroad. Have we taken that into account? And I understand your argument that inaction would be worse, but have we taken into account what the implications could be of an Assad that could weather a limited strike, and what that could mean for the long-term prospects of the conflict?
Yes, we absolutely have. For certain, we've taken that into account. He will, he will weather. The president's asking for a limited authority to degrade his current capacity and to deter him from using it again. He is not asking for permission from the Congress to go destroy the entire regime or to, do a much more extensive kind of thing. That's not what he's asking. So he will be able to stand up, and no doubt he'll try to claim that somehow this is, something positive for him. But I think General Dempsey has made it clear, and I think we believe deeply, as do others who are knowledgeable about this in the region, that there is no way that it will, in fact, be beneficial for him, that will not translate for him on the ground, that the defections that are taking place now and other things that will happen will further degrade his capacity to prosecute going forward. And I want to emphasize something. I want to come back to it because I don't want anybody misinterpreting this from earlier. This authorization does not contemplate and should not have any allowance for any troop on the ground. I just want to make that absolutely clear. What I was doing was hypothesizing about a potential, it might occur at some point in time, but not in this authorization, in no way. Be crystal clear, there's no problem in our having the language that has zero capacity for American troops on the ground within the authorization the president is asking for. And I don't want anybody in the media or elsewhere to misinterpret that coming out of here. As I said earlier, I repeat it again now. That's important.
Thank you. And I can assure you that that'll be in the resolution.